This is Carolyn Weber in Spanish Fork, Utah. This is Climb Over Your Brick Walls, Finding Orphans and Their Records. This is part 3 of a series. If you haven't watched the other 2 parts, you might want to check that out. It's wonderful to be part of this FamilySearch RootsTech Connect, and I encourage you to check out the different recordings that are available on so many different subjects. Some people use DNA to find the relatives for orphans. However, this time it all started with a DNA kit. A gentleman found a close match and learned that he had 2 much older sisters that had been sent to an orphanage. And his match was a descendant of one of these girls and shared this newspaper article with him. After discovering that he had 2 sisters that he didn't know about, that were about 30 years older than him, he needed to do some research to see if he could figure out what had happened to them. So over 105 years ago, 4 girls were placed in this orphanage. The youngest 2 of them were my friend Jim's sisters. He knew what happened to Josephine, but he didn't know what happened to Lois. Josephine's family was found through his match with DNA. He's yet to find a connection to Lois. Let's learn a little more. Lois and her sister Josephine were taken to the Children's Home Society in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in 1916. Josephine was adopted prior to December 1917. It is known that Lois was no longer in the orphanage at that time, but it's unclear what happened. Many successful searches have been performed, but as of yet, we haven't found her. Some of the places that we've searched have included death indexes, but there's been a lot of searching in different archives and libraries, genealogical societies, etc. But what a treasure it was that he was gifted a copy of this from his new cousin. One of the things that we could learn from the information we found was that the children were placed, or how many children were placed during a given calendar year. And we know that at the end of the year, or at least in November, there was only 1 girl left and 5 boys by November. We also know that 2 girls had died during the year. We haven't figured out where Lois fits into this story yet. We did contact an archive and found their register. It was one of these simple registers. It only listed the child's name, who the adoptees were, the county the child came from, and where they ended up going out to, and where their mother had lived. It only included 1 of the 2 girls. So when you're doing searches for adoptees or orphans that have been reconnected with other families, sometimes you make a connection with somebody that may have the same name, fits the same description, maybe in the same area, and you're wondering, could this possibly be the same Lois? Well, this is a case where we did that, but we found that by checking through the school records found in the FamilySearch catalog, we were able to determine that this Lois was not the Lois that we were searching for. And the way we figured this out was that we had determined that she had remained with her family at a different time period. FamilySearch has wiki articles or pages that you can check to find lots of different things. When you're searching for an orphan, checking court records is always important. Probate records and guardianship records. These are things that you can do through the wiki pages by looking for the clerk of the circuit court of the particular area that you're looking for. So zoom in on the location first and then find what records are available. You can find your wiki pages at familysearch.org/wiki and then just choose the locations and start to zoom in. See if you can find particular court records that might be pertinent to the case you're at. If you have some time periods in mind, that really helps. We spoke previously about the National Archives. In the 1890s, the Native Americans were faced with the extermination of their families, destruction of the culture and their family units, as the United States government tried to assimilate them into the white society. And many of their children were placed into boarding schools, mission schools, and even orphanages. Children were often taught English and not allowed to speak their native tongue. A lot of family connections were lost this way. However, the National Archives does have records for these, and this would be important to check for these. There are also orphan records for the different tribes. The Dawes Act made it so that the Indians were given land, and records for orphans where they were given land are also existing. So a payroll for the benefit of orphan children of the Creeks. Here's an example. This is from, I think it's in 1832. It talks about the section of land that's been allotted for orphanages or for orphan children of the Creeks and putting it into a trust fund. You can find more information about that. Here would be an example in Oklahoma and Indian Territory of a payroll. And this is also found, in your census records has given me a link to this. So I know the child's name, and the signature here are from somebody that's the person responsible for the orphanages. In this case, the signature is Thomas, looks like Kennard, and he's the town chief. But it lists different orphans, and it says there's 2 orphans here, but notice that one of them died prior to the date of 18, I can't see what it is. So when Native Americans were placed in orphanages and boarding schools, sometimes this was literally just because they were separated from their families in a way to bring them into white society. Sometimes it is going to be from disease or federal policies or economic needs. Some of the 5 civilized tribes in Oklahoma, the Seneca in New York, and a couple of the tribes from South Dakota are some of the prime areas where Indian children or Native American children were placed in orphanages. Now, the Freedmen's Bureau is going to list African American children who were indentured. So some of these are going to be orphans. Some of them may fall into some similar categories as what we're talking about. Sometimes they're going to be bound out due to parental neglect, poverty, lack of employment, the misdeeds of a parent. So in the southern states prior to the Civil War, free Black children were sometimes bound out to their white masters. After the Civil War, the preference was given to bind the Black children to their former slaveholders. If children of color were placed in an orphanage, they were typically segregated to an orphanage that was set up for colored children. If there was not room in an orphanage, they would often be sent to a reform school or a jail, even if they had no criminal activity. Now, in the Freedmen's Bureau, you can check for a register of indentures. Typically, underage children who were orphans or not able to provide for themselves might be listed in here with who they were signed out to for an indenture or an apprenticeship. Now, in the South, you're going to be able to find colored orphanages. In the New England area, there's going to be very few, if any. When you're searching for an orphan or an orphanage, remember to check across your state boundaries. Sometimes we try to hold our area of focus too tightly. A child born in Ohio might have been placed in the Michigan orphanages just across the state lines. So you would check the different levels of jurisdiction, their federal, your state, your county, and smaller localities for records. Now, there are lots of different areas to look. We've talked about Google, the archives, historical societies. Religious connections are an important thing to check out, and religious archives. If you know what religion your family might be connected to, or if you can find what the primary religion in a particular area is, those are useful. We've talked about using the State Library and WorldCat. Online, there are many books. Some of them can be found in the Google Books section. We've talked about census records, and we also talked about orphanfinder.com. I hope that each of you can find a fun photo that shows children from the orphanage that you're interested in, or some other important pieces of your family story. So we're going to talk right now about using Google Books. You can search for a particular orphanage and use keywords looking for what you want. I put in here, History of Pennsylvania Orphanage. Now notice right below my keywords, you have the choice on Google to search for all or news, maps, images. I selected books. So for instance, if I was looking for a record or a book that talked about the Civil War soldiers' orphan schools of Pennsylvania during that particular time period, this might have been a really interesting find for me. But look down a little lower. What if I was looking for the history of the St. Paul's Orphans Home, etc.? So you can screen it and just keep using keywords. Try to target the concepts that you're looking for and see what you can find. So these books that are listed on Google Books, some of them are older books and they're in the public domain. So they're free for us to be able to look at. They've been digitized and literally listed here, and you can see the entire book. Other books are under copyright and they'll only show you a portion of the book. That's all that they can share online for just doing that for free. Historical societies. This is from the Minnesota Historical Society, and it's records of the Washburn Memorial Orphan Asylum. But there are 2 boxes, or 1.5 cubic feet of information here. It tells you about the history of the orphanage. And this is an orphanage that opened in November of 1886. It had orphaned, half-orphaned, meaning they had one parent, and other dependent and neglected children under the age of 15. This is an important thing to pay attention to when you're searching an orphanage, is the ages of the children that it would care for. For instance, some orphanages would not take children under the age of 5 because the death rate was so high. Some orphanages would not keep them after maybe they were 12 or 15. They could move on to more adult tasks like working and caring for themselves. Sometimes you'll find, using historical society information, oral and written histories. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project is one you might want to check out, because they have an oral history project that they've interviewed a lot of orphans. So you're going to go back to Library of Congress records to search for that. This is details about William J. O'Hara, and they're found in an application when his mother applied to put him in an orphan's home in Columbus, Ohio. So his mother is placing him. We can tell he's not a full orphan. And this is a nice example of what we could hope to find. That William's listed as an inmate. Remember, this doesn't mean they're guilty of a criminal offense. It just means they've been placed and confined there. And they're considering the admission of William O'Hara. He's a child, and she's giving her permission to list him there, but she also wants to be able to remove him and take him back when she wants to. She lists his name and his age. He's 6 years old, born on May 5th. You can tell where he was born, May 5th, 1897 in Columbus, Ohio. What his parents' names are. What a treat. And is his parent living? And he lists that his mother is. So she's obviously under financial duress to be able to place her child there. We have her address. We know he has other relatives. He has a grandmother. Obviously, she's not in a position to take care of him either. And we know her address. His complexion is light, his eyes are blue, his hair is light, and he's 3 foot tall. This must have been a very hard decision for his mother to be able to place him there. We need to remember the need is great, but also remember not all of the orphans in the orphanages are without parents. Checking a newspaper article here. This is from the San Francisco Examiner. Special notices. This tells the names of children and their ages that have been admitted since a particular date. Check your newspapers in the areas that you're researching. See what you can find. Libraries are a great source for newspapers. We've talked about other areas that we found newspapers. We'll continue to touch base with these as we go through this presentation. Purdue University has a list of free newspapers that are available by state. Other places for newspapers, you can go to newspapers.com, etc. chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. This is one that is a free source. We've talked about that. Ancestry.com has some newspapers. One of my favorites is fultonsearch.org. This is mainly for the New York area, but I've been surprised to find articles for many different areas. Be careful, sometimes the site is down. Don't give up. Try again. This is a site that's run by one man, and he's done an incredible job. There's other places here listed for newspapers, but let's move forward. Looking here in the Minnesota archives, I found a record of a maternity home. If your orphan was a child that was released, you might want to be looking in maternity hospital records or maternity home records. I've used a finding aid for the Minnesota Historical Society to find some of these records. Using church records to find the birth parent or to find an orphanage. Church records are usually kept separate from the state records, separation of church and state. Now, in a church record, you might find baptismal or sacramental records, or records of births or deaths, or when a family joined a congregation. When I'm looking for what church would be in an area, I use what I refer to as the first Google. Before there was Google, we had city directories. You can use a city directory for an area you're looking for. You can find many of these at FamilySearch or on Ancestry. Find out what churches asylums, and orphanages were in a particular area. We can also use clues by nationality to consider which religious group we might want to check first. So many Scandinavian people were Lutheran. Most of your Latin countries will come through as Catholics. France, Italy, Poland, you want to check Catholic. German, check Catholic or Lutheran. England, the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. Now, to find these church records, go back to your FamilySearch wiki and do a search that includes church records. You can often find where the records are kept. Here's an example. I've gone to the wiki for the Chicago Cook County, Illinois. You can also use the FamilySearch catalog for a particular location and look for records that are available. In Chicago, I found the record collections, the archive areas for the Catholic, the Lutheran, and the Methodist Church. So if your child was associated with an orphanage of one of those religious groups, this might be a place to check. Orphan Trains. Over 200,000, maybe 250,000 children were shipped out by train to many different states and even into Canada. There's a FamilySearch page for information about the orphan trains. You can also find on Ancestry records of some of the orphanage hospitals, asylums, etc. in New York. So once again, I'm limiting my keyword search. I've gone into a catalog search, just using the keyword of orphan. Most of what came up were New York area orphanage records. Here's an example of one. I can come into the New York orphans placed in the New York Foundling Hospital and Children's Aid Society. Be careful, don't put in too much information. Keep it limited and add more information if you get too many hits. If the last name may be difficult to spell, I certainly wouldn't put it all in first. For instance, if I was looking for somebody named John, but his last name was hard to spell, I might put John and maybe do the first letter of the surname, or a couple of letters and then an asterisk, which is a wild card, and then not even put the rest of it. You know, maybe I didn't know if his last name ended in S-E-N or S-O-N. Don't limit it. Give it a pretty open area to search, and then tighten it up if you find too many people with that name. Sometimes there's so many people that just putting a first name won't work. You have to start narrowing it down by giving more information, though. Don't forget to use orphanfinder.com. I'm wishing you luck as you search for your orphan. I hope that some of the resources I've provided have given you new ideas, stimulated new paths for your search, and that you can find the information you're looking for. I hope you can find more information about the individual, their families, the background of the home, and the history that they have. Where did they spend their time? Create their story so it's not just a sentence. Make it a paragraph. Make it a story.